What's up, YouTube? Hey, tonight I want to talk about swim jigs with you guys, particularly store-bought swim jigs, okay? I'll talk about the 3 things I look for when buying a new swim jig. I'll discuss my swim jig rod setup, and I'll discuss with you guys my favorite swim jig company. So let's get to it, guys. Let's talk some swim jigs. Alright, guys, the first thing I look at when I'm buying a new swim jig is the weed guard. I want a weed guard that's gonna allow me to fish the thickest vegetation without getting hung up, but that's also gonna provide just enough flex so that way when I set the hook, I know I'm always gonna get a good deep hook in that fish's mouth. So that's the first thing I look at, is how good is this weed guard. Alright guys, the second thing I look for when I'm buying a swim jig is the quality of the hook. I want a hook that I know when I'm forcing those big fish out of the heavy cover is not gonna flex out on me, guys. So that's it. The second thing I look for is the hook quality. Alright guys, the third and final thing I look for when buying a new swim jig is the skirt. You know, we catch a lot of fish here in Florida, and sometimes when you're throwing a swim jig all day long, that skirt will fall apart on you, especially when you're really on a big school of fish. I want a swim jig where I know I'm not going to only buy it to use for one day at a time. I want a swim jig where I know at the end of the day, I'm still going to have a swim jig left to throw. You know, there's a lot of companies that make swim jigs, and at the end of the day, you're left with just a weed guard and a hook. And with this particular company that I use, you can feel confident knowing that you're going to have this swim jig for quite a few fishing trips before having to replace it. So now that I've discussed the top 3 things I look for when buying a swim jig, I'll discuss my swim jig rod and reel setup. Now this particular rod is a Shaman 904, 7 foot 6 inches long, and it's rated from anything from a 1/4 ounce all the way up to a 2 ounce. So what I look for in a swim jig rod is a rod that's going to be long enough to let me bomb that swim jig a mile if I need to. But another thing I like about this 7.6 is it's just long enough to where if a fish bites my swim jig and it's at the end of a cast, I can feel confident that I have enough rod where when I set the hook, that's really going to load up on them and that hook's going to get buried deep in that fish's mouth. This reel is a Lew's Speed Spool Super Duty. Okay, it's an 8.0 to 1. I like a little faster reel when I'm throwing my swim jigs because for one, I can kind of swim them right across the surface if that's what the fish are like in that particular day. And then I could always slow down my retrieve for those days when they're a little bit more lethargic. Alright guys, now that we've discussed my 3 things I look for in buying a new swim jig, we've talked about my swim jig rod and reel setup, I want to close the video out by discussing my favorite swim jig company on the market right now, and that's Dirty Jigs. As you can see, I've got plenty of them, just a little bit of them. I have a ton of them in my boat, and I like their No Jack swim jig. Now they make 2. The original I believe is called the Kusa swim jig. Don't shoot the messenger if I'm not 100%, but I think it was called the Kusa swim jig. Okay, that was made with a mustad hook. The No Jack swim jig is made with a Gamakatsu hook, and it is a shark hook, guys. You know, last week we talked about flipping hooks, and I talked about the hack attack hook being a little bit too meaty where I felt like fish threw it more. I haven't had that issue with swim jigs. For some reason, this No Jack swim jig hasn't been an issue with me. However, if you guys do notice that they're throwing the hook more, you could always go back to the Kusa swim jig that Dirty Jigs makes. It's a little less meatier hook. That mustad hook is still gonna be a good hook. It's not gonna flex out and you're not gonna have an issue with it. Me personally, my equipment is heavy enough to where I could get that No Jack Gamakatsu hook in the fish's mouth and I haven't had an issue. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the video here, guys, but do me a favor, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and comment down below. Let me know who makes your favorite swim jig and what's your swim jig rod and reel setup looking like. Alright guys, I'm gonna keep making videos. Hopefully we can close out the week and I'll have my boat next week, so I'll be back on the water for y'all. Until then, we'll see you guys tomorrow.